Picture three men. They are beyond sight or healthy diet. Isolated by a virus, they decide to turn to old TV for solace. Will they find comfort? Or will they find the Twilight Zone? Welcome to the Twilight Zone Zone. This is your host, Nick Hoffman, and on panel we've got Daniel.
Hello, this is Daniel, and usually I play games of chess with death.
And this is Matthew W. Quinn, and maybe I will, maybe I won't give you a sales pitch for the ages for my books. Just check them out on Amazon.
What we've got going here is a attempt at recording remotely for the first time. What you may or may not have heard, depending on whether or not I release this, or I guess our initial ad, is a podcast where we're going to recap some of the early classics of the modern television age. In the early golden age of TV, which is the 1960s, there of course was a classic television show called The Twilight Zone. And the nice thing about The Twilight Zone is that we can access it easily, so you can follow along with us. As you can see from the title, I guess both of them kind of alluded to, we're going off of a list published by Vanity Fair, kind of ticking down the greatest episodes of the Twilight Zone of all time, corresponding, the article at least corresponded, Peele's rebirth of the show a couple years ago. Have you guys seen any of the new one?
I've seen the first episode with about the stand-up comedian who, when he performs on stage and makes people laugh by making fun of someone, that person ceases to exist.
Oh, that's funny. No, I haven't seen that. I really haven't seen any of it.
Well, Tracy Morgan was like the demon character.
Oh, gotcha.
I don't really watch TV. I mean, I have Netflix, but that's just for movies and like the V-War show. I've never watched any Twilight Zone.
So, Matt,
you could have also just said no.
It was never a lazy New Year's Day for you, and you didn't have the Sci-Fi Channel?
No.
So have you really not ever watched any of the Twilight Zone?
Only a little. Like, I think I might have seen that episode where there's the car that follows a guy around until he turns himself into the police for killing a man.
Interesting. Okay, well,
Which one
then
was
for
that?
Matt,
Beats me.
yeah.
Because when I watch these two episodes for the show, they don't seem to have a lot of the distinctive soundtrack, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. I mean, they're both from season 1.
Yeah, and they're both fairly early on. For those of you who are following along, we're going to do this chronologically based on the release date of the episodes. Vanity Fair did a list of the top 26, which means that we have 13 weeks of this. We will review 2 episodes at once, and each episode we review, we will then kind of do our normal myopia, kind of poking fun at the core concept of the episode, and then we'll say which of the 2 episodes should people watch. We started out with episode 2 from season 1, called One for the Angels, and then episode 5 of season 1 called The Walking Distance, or Walking Distance, I guess. Since chronologically it came first, let's talk the first one. Right? Let's talk One for the Angels. So we are introduced to the Twilight Zone with its weird, trippy introduction. And I guess, Matt, we can kind of poke you a little bit because you haven't watched much of this show. So what are your first impressions of this? This is kind of an iconic introduction. So I'm curious what you think.
It was all right. I mean, I think of the 2, One for the Angels was the best one.
Well, not even get into that, but like get into the aesthetics of the show. Like, you're the sci-fi fantasy author. Like, what do you think when you watch something like this?
Well,
it's so kind of iconically sci-fi fantasy.
That one was entertaining. I don't really have anything profound to say about it, other than it feels very innocent. I mean, was made in the 60s.
Were you aware of, like, the concept of the Twilight Zone?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm not going to say it's surprising, but since Matt hadn't seen it, I guess it's kind of worth talking about a little bit. The Twilight Zone as an idea, as a concept, is an anthology show. That means that though the host is the same, it's always Rod Serling. There's like 156 episodes of the show. He wrote something like 130, making him one of the most prolific sci-fi authors of the era. If you've ever watched anything from a Simpsons Treehouse of Horror to, frankly, any number of things, like the Twilight Zone might be the most plagiarized idea factory of all time.
It might be like John Carter got ripped off so many times. I saw the time the John Carter movie came out, everyone thought it was derivative, because I saw the Treehouse of Horror long before I saw any Twilight Zone at all.
And like that's kind of what you get. And you know, it's interesting for me, Matt, that you say it's so tame. This show is constantly about death and suicide and bleakness, which we'll get to, especially the darkness of that second episode, which again we'll get to in a moment. But it's an anthology show, meaning that other than Rod Serling's kind of smoke-filled voice and his kind of black, like pressed suit, it's slightly different each time. They use a lot of the same actors time and time again. People like William Shatner, who were, you know, mild celebrities at the time, were on it a lot. And then ultimately it becomes a kind of signature. This first one for the Angels, has kind of an old vaudevillian actor who Daniel wants to talk to about in a second.
Who was the guy who played the Penguin in the Adam West Batman show? Because he was on Twilight Zone.
Yes. It's, oh gosh. It's going to bug me.
I got to look this up.
No, it'll come to me in like 2 seconds. Burgess Meredith.
Yes.
Burgess Meredith is in fact coming up soon, because he's also in Time Enough at Last. He's the guy whose glasses break. But in the meantime, so this kind of anthology, this darkness, this grimness, filled with Cold War paranoia, filled with kind of the constant fear of the man in the gray flannel suit, all comes together to form this kind of perfect anthology program.
Well, the whole idea behind the twist, like, if you look at a modern twist, the idea is, how could that happen to these people? And in the Twilight Zone, the message was, they deserve it.
Yeah. It's an interesting show of hoisted by his own petard, as they put it on the Futurama. Let's talk about this first episode. This episode, One for the Angels, was episode number 2 of the Twilight Zone. It aired originally October 9th, 1959, starring Lou Bookman, who is plays a pitchman during the summer. In fact, I should give the opening narration wherever I can. Street scene, summer, the present. Man on the sidewalk named Lou Bookman, age 60-ish, occupation pitchman. Lou Bookman, a fixture of the summer, a rather minor component to a hot July, a nondescript, commonplace little man whose life is a treadmill built out of sidewalks. And in just a moment, Lou Bookman will have concerned himself with survival, because as of 3 o'clock this hot July afternoon, he'll be stalked by Mr. Death. Matt, do you have a plot synopsis, or do you want me to just go ahead and give mine?
Okay, he's this old man who sells knickknacks on the side of the road, including like old toy robots and whatnot, and all the neighborhood children seem to love him. But there's this guy who looks a lot like Rod Serling himself, but apparently isn't. Mm-hmm. Kind of floating in the background.
It's not.
And then he eventually makes his way. He eventually goes back to his apartment. It turns out that guy is Death, who says that today's the day he dies, and Mr. Bookman proceeds to try and loophole his way out of that, only there are consequences.
Right.
Yep.
For those of you who are trying to picture him and how he sounds, his name is Ed Wynn. He's kind of a dumpy guy in his he's given the age 68 or 69, almost 70. And his birth date is actually almost the same as the character. He was born in 1886.
Ed Wynn was the guy who voiced the Mad Hatter in Disney's Alice in Wonderland. Same guy.
That's right. And, you know, again, if you look him up, he's the guy who showed up in the Ziegfeld Follies movie. And, like, he is a standard kind of comedy mainstay. He's also in Mary Poppins, where he plays Uncle Albert, and he's in That Darn Cat, and he's also even in The Absent-Minded Professor. Like, he was just like a kind of goofy, funny guy, which is also kind of a staple of the Twilight Zone, which is not to say that Edwin or whatever is something crazy. It's that he is a lighthearted jokester, as Matt kind of alludes to. He's the guy who sells knickknacks and ties and toys and gives them to the kids and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He is put in an impossible situation, right? And his character doesn't change. It doesn't feel like it's out of sort. It's not like Leslie Nielsen going from drama to comedy. It's that this comedic person is put in a tragic situation.
He was an unusual character for the Twilight Zone because he's so sympathetic, right? He's not a villain. He's not being punished for his sins. He's just a normal guy in a neighborhood who's afraid of dying, which is normal.
Yeah, and he talks about, we brought the show how innocent it is. You know, here he is, old man, all the neighborhood children love him, and one of them goes up to his apartment to get her to fix her toy, and no one seems to think that's weird at all. And then when Death shows up, he's like, "Are you the census taker?" Like, there's a strange man in his apartment. No one gets accused of any misbehavior. Everyone seems to just think the best of everyone. Like, he doesn't like start shooting at Death thinking he's a burglar or something. He just like, "Oh, are you the census taker? Are you lost?" I mean, it's so
and I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's where the comedy comes from. In fact, in some ways, the most interesting thing is, I mean, Death immediately says, "No one can see me and hear me but you." You know, it's very Dickensian in that way. But in some ways, it almost reminds me of, I guess, stay tuned to the end of the back end of the show if we make it that far, the Shatner episode, right? Because Shatner's also just a regular dude on a plane and sees something out of the corner of his eye, which is outrageous that no one else can see. And his slow descent into madness because of this thing which no one else can see is what drives him over the edge.
Is it madness?
Well, no, it turns out to be real, but isn't the end of the episode he's like taken away on a stretcher? Like, he literally goes crazy. Though he's right.
Right or wrong, your behavior was still disruptive, young man. Perhaps spending the remainder of your life in a madhouse will teach you some manners.
Yeah, thank you, Principal Skinner.
So I'll go ahead and tell you, Nick, because I know you're looking forward to it. So Mr. Death in this episode is presented as this bureaucrat character who is really just focused on the job. He doesn't care about the morality of what he's doing or how good someone is. It's just, this is your time. And Nick, here's what you were waiting for. The guy who plays Death in this episode is a guy named Murray Hamilton. He was in a bunch of stuff throughout the 50s and 60s. He was in Anatomy of Murder. He was in Seconds, which is a personal favorite of mine. And he was in The Graduate as Mr. Robinson. And he was the mayor in Jaws.
Oh, no kidding. Yes. Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's a great episode.
Wow, he must have aged a bit.
Well, that was 20 years after this. Or I guess 15 years, 16 years?
Pretty close.
Yeah, because the mayor in Jaws was real gray hair, and he's so dark-haired I thought he was Rod Serling himself.
Yeah, and there's nowhere to make someone's hair gray. But yeah, no, he's a great character actor. And he's very good in this, you know. And, you know, I don't want to say critique you, because he is very bureaucratic. He's also kind of, you know, very blasé about the whole process.
It kind of reminded me of Neil Gaiman's Death. Obviously the character, not the actual guy, he's still with us.
Yeah, right.
But, like, she's kind of blasé about the whole thing.
In Sandman, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so he says he doesn't want to die because he's always wanted to make what he calls a pitch to the angels, which is that one great pitch, the one that really, you know, shakes, you know, whatever, you know, the one that is one for the record book, so to speak. And it's just a stalling tactic to say, you know, because he doesn't want to die. No one wants to die, as Mr. Death always puts it.
Well, initially, the whole thing is a negotiation because Death's like, okay, there's 3 conditions we may consider to not take you to the afterlife tonight. And one of them is unfinished business. So he's like, well, I've never heard a Zulu war dance. This was made in the 1950s. Apologies.
I mean, and it's all these things. I've never flown in a balloon or flown in a helicopter. Yeah. And then ultimately he settles on this whole pitch to the angels thing. And Death says, okay, well, you can spend all the time you want as long as you get to make this pitch to the angels. Lou Bookman thinks he's pulled something over on Death. But instead, he takes away this little girl who gets hit by a truck.
Now, before we go into that, Bookman was very popular with the neighborhood kids. What was the name of this kid? Maggie? McGaggy, that's her name.
Yes, McGaggy. She's established throughout the episode.
Yeah.
For those of you who are interested in stage writing or writing short stories, the Twilight Zone's not a bad place to learn the craft, because he really structures these little 3-act, 25-minute masterpieces when he's putting them together. But yeah, so Maggie is hit by a truck. Oh, please.
That's the thing about the Twilight Zone. He takes these complex stories and mashes them into something that works in 25 minutes, which I don't know if anyone today could do that.
No, I think you're right. I think it's what makes this show so kind of powerful and unique and whatever. Maggie's hit by a truck and is in a coma, and Death is waiting outside of her room because if he's not going to take Lou at midnight, he's going to take this little girl at midnight.
And Lou basically at one point is practically throwing himself at Death, and Death is like, no.
We already made our deal.
Which is, I guess, fantastic. At the end, this is where he makes his pitch to the angels. Death observes this incredible pitch. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Like, he sells them ties. And it's funny because Death starts looking haggard, like he's really overwhelmed. He's the drunk guy on the couch who starts buying things from the As Seen on TV channel.
Now,
Death actually gets excited, like when he's pitching all those different products. Death is like, I'll buy it. And it's so obvious that Bookman is trying to pull something on him, but Death doesn't seem to notice that at all.
The way I interpret it is Death knew exactly what was going on. He just was giving Bookman an opportunity to redeem himself.
Because I think the whole thing at the end is you can't trick Death, because who gets taken away at midnight but Lou Bookman? The story, in fact, doesn't change. The little girl gets hurt, but the doctor says she's regaining consciousness. She'll be fine. That's because we didn't believe in brain trauma in 1959, I guess. But Bookman makes his pitch. He saves someone's life because of a pitch. And he walks into the hereafter.
Yeah, and a pitch to the angels. What is Death?
Yeah, the angel of death. That's exactly right.
As Death's manservant, I think.
Well, yeah, and if I recall correctly, he goes, people down in the afterlife are going to need stuff, and I'll sell it to them. And it's such a great, it's almost a sweet moment. It's a very bizarre shift, but that's that. Any parting thoughts before we switch to the next episode?
This is a good one because it's a morality play, which is what the Twilight Zone always was.
And I think it's particularly tightly written, right? Because of the character of Bookman, it feels loose. It feels kind of free-flowing. But there's always something on screen happening. It's impactful, right? This is a script that they clearly spent a lot of time fixing, and it's perfect. For a teleplay, it's a truly remarkable teleplay. And I will say, I do realize that we're kind of putting our finger on the scales here. Since we're only reviewing like the best episodes, it makes it really easy to talk about how great this show is. But, again, for the first, 3 seasons, there's almost no changes to the format. It really is just a good, solid show.
There's plenty of bad Twilight Zones.
Yeah, there are. There sure are. But we won't watch any of them because of the nature of our format, which is great for me. I just get to rewatch a show I like. It's not like we're going in episode by episode in a truest fashion. All right, so we'll transfer now to episode number 5. What did I say? Yeah, number 5, Walking Distance.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
And we're back. So, episode number 2, Walking Distance. Let's do the opening narration. Martin Sloan, age 36, occupation vice president ad agency in charge of media. This was not a Sunday drive for Mr. Sloan. Perhaps he doesn't know it at the time, but it's an exodus. Somewhere up the road, he's looking for sanity, and somewhere up the road, he'll find something else. By the way, I notice in these, I'm so used to it being like I don't even know how to put it. Well, first of all, it doesn't end with he'll find something else. The Twilight Zone, right?
Right.
That's how they always end now. But that's how this episode number 5 originally aired October 31st, 1959. So for a creepy show, this was its Halloween episode.
This
Daniel,
was
what do you got?
Halloween episode? Oh man,
October 30th, man.
Oh.
I know.
Well, it's not.
It makes me
especially scary. So that could be ironic. Like for Halloween, the goth girl I knew in middle school came dressed like a regular person.
This is the costume I wear as a critique against you.
That's right.
I remember those emo kids in my creative writing class in high school, and I'm sure they're all doing just fine now.
That's right. It's funny. I went to.
I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Well, sure. I went to a private high school, so we had uniforms. But it's funny, like what the goth kids did to get away with being kind of gothy. You know, darker makeup on the girls, kind of straightened black hair for the guys.
So the goth kids from South Park.
Pretty much. To be fair to South Park, those dudes are a few years older than we are. So all of their old cliches are from, I guess, our age. When did South Park come out? 99?
97.
Earlier than that.
A few years older than 97. We are. I gotta look this up real quick.
Probably 5 years? 6 years?
Okay.
I mean, I don't know.
Trey Parker was born in 1969.
Oh yeah, okay, so 16 years older than I am. Or 14 years older than I am. So there you go.
Oh, and he's divorced again.
Who? Trey Parker?
Yeah.
Well, that's funny. I'm sorry. I mean, it's funny that you're so bummed about it. I have no point of reference.
I just didn't realize that until right this moment.
So you're saying he's available?
Oh, absolutely.
Uh-oh, Nick, you're a married man. Don't start thinking that.
Well, I mean, Matt Stone is married, tragically, I guess. This is the oldest 36-year-old I've ever seen. Something about aging back then just got real rough, I guess.
Well, the inflation and everything.
Can't afford to be old on this salary.
Get an ice cream soda for 10 cents, then it became 35 cents.
Now, there's this other episode the Twilight Zone did around aging in the past. It had Buster Keaton in it. It was great. And there's this one bit in it where in 1890, Buster Keaton sings sirloin steak, 17 cents a pound. And he's like, what do they think we are, millionaires? Well, that's a way better episode than this one.
Holy shit. The guy who plays Gig has a crazy story. So the guy, Martin, is, I guess we have our cold open, is he is driving erratically down this road towards, what's the city? Morningwood?
No, Homewood, I believe.
And
tenuous and obscure office space.
Anyway, and he is, rude to the gas attendant, and he says, Morningwood, or Homewood rather. That's not too far. It's 1.5 miles. Maybe I'll just take a little walk while you change my oil or whatever he was going to do. The guy who did it is a guy named Gig Young. He is an Academy Award winner. He won the Academy Award for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? For Best Supporting Actor. He was in Teacher's Pet.
He was also in Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, if you ever seen that.
Mm-hmm. And he did a lot of TV. He's one of these people who kind of switched over in the golden age of television, being in the Twilight Zone, of course. He was in the Alfred Hitchcock hour, yada yada yada. I guess bummed for you, Matt. Daniel. He was he was married 5 times, including once to the woman who played Samantha on Bewitched.
Isn't there no respect for the institution of marriage anymore?
Yeah. And then his 3rd wife killed him on October 19th, 1978. 3 weeks into his marriage to Schmidt, the couple were found dead in their Manhattan apartment. Police surmised...
Wait, both of them?
Yeah, murder-suicide. Crazy. He is on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He's in a million things. Yeah, this strong-jawed American actor type who is... Oh
well,
God, no.
To be fair, his character in this episode is a complete lunatic.
He is. By the way, he's playing 36 and he is 46 at the time.
A complete lunatic who chases a kid around on a carousel, but somehow does not get arrested.
Among other things.
So he's reminiscing about the fact that he grew up in this small town and it was $10 for an ice cream soda, which is like a milkshake, I guess. And then in the interim, he discovers that town. And it seemingly has not ever changed at all.
Yeah, your first clue is that the old man who he thinks is dead is still alive.
Yeah, the old soda jerk. And then we have this kind of him traipsing through his old town. He discovers his old family home and effectively sees himself.
Let's back up a bit. At the grocery store, which it's not really a grocery store, it's like a soda fountain / general store. And he stops and they're talking about, I remember when I was a kid coming here and how the ice cream sodas cost a dime or whatever. And then talking about old man Wilson sleeping in the supply room. He doesn't realize at first that Wilson's still in the back and everything.
We see it though. Like that's kind of where these things start to take like a weird twist. Well, it's not even a twist. We can talk about how this one works, kind of, sort of, which isn't particularly well. Yeah, he walks through this town, and we are introduced more and more to the fact that things are the way he described them when he was being nostalgic.
Here's the other thing I don't get about this. What's the catch? Like, okay, so he's at his childhood home back in the 30s. Is it to punish him? Is it to show the folly of his wish? What's going on?
I mean, I don't have an answer for you.
It seems to be about the dangers of nostalgia. You know, you can't go back.
But why is he punished for that? I mean, he's not a bad dude. He's a little short with the gas station attendant at first, but he apologizes. I don't get it.
He seems like kind of, chasing after his past self, who's like 10, when the kid is obviously running away from him, seems a bit bonkers.
It's so unusual for a Twilight Zone episode because no one's being punished. There's no hubris. There's really not a whole lot going here.
I guess the weird thing, of course, is that he's the same and everything's the same, and then he panics and leaves. Like, yeah, it's not like you can't go home again, but it is like you can't go home again. I don't know. It's interesting. And it's funny because, well, we said we got this from a list. We'll talk about the list at the end, but even Time Magazine said this was like one of the top 10 episodes of all time.
That's weird.
Yeah, I mean, he traipses through the town, as you alluded to. He eventually stumbles across his family home. At the family home, he kind of scares the parents effectively, which is fine. And then oh, please.
How would your parents have reacted if you, right now, Nick, somehow ended up in 1997 and showed up at their house? I imagine they wouldn't be like, "Welcome home, son."
Oh, no. It's a perfectly rational solution. But, like, I think they will do the same kind of thing better. like, trying to prevent something from happening. I'm almost positive there's a thing where someone goes back in time and tries to stop an event. Nowadays it'd be Kennedy's assassination or 9/11 or whatever.
Well, you mentioned one of the revival shows in the early 2000s, right? They actually did that exact plot, and it was essentially about a guy who was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He gets hit by a car, and when he comes to, he's back in 1968, Memphis, a couple days before Martin Luther King was assassinated. Do you mind if I go ahead and tell you the whole twist?
I mean, whatever, man.
All right. So he meets this 10-year-old kid in Memphis with this unique birthmark on his face, and he spends a couple days with the kid and his single mom. It doesn't go into that territory, but right as he's going to the motel where King was to save him, the kid's following him on his bicycle, and he's about to get hit by a car, right? He goes and saves the kid, and he ends up being hit by that car. MLK is still assassinated. But as he dies in 68, he comes back to the appointment where the doctor's saying, you have a terminal brain tumor. But instead of saying, there's no hope, he says, we're not out of the woods, but we've got a doctor here who's been researching this exact thing, and he's made a lot of progress. And this doctor walks in, and it's a middle-aged doctor with the same birthmark. One of the better episodes of that run.
I was expecting that he goes back in time, tries to stop the assassination, and ends up getting framed for it. Because that's like...
Well, I mean, that's literally a Star Trek episode. A very good Star Trek episode. Where Kirk and Spock end up back in time looking for Dr. McCoy. And when they first arrive in New York, circa 1930-something, they see a woman about to be hit by a car. And they save her from being hit by the car. But by saving her, she was going to be, essentially she is a prominent pacifist. And she makes it so that the U.S. never enters World War II, and therefore the Nazis win the war. The classic trope of 1960s go back in time. And so you get the great line with Spock saying, Edith Keeler must die.
Wasn't there a Star Trek where they save JFK and take him to the future, but he realizes how screwed everything is, so he voluntarily says, take me back, I want to be assassinated?
I know what you're talking about. Now I can't remember if it's maybe it's TNG.
It might be. You would know more than I would.
That was apparently what Roddenberry wanted to do for Star Trek Episode 2, or the second Star Trek movie instead of Wrath of Khan. Oh, what a mistake that would have been. Oh, and you're wrong, but you're right. It's not Star Trek, it's Red Dwarf.
Oh, there we go.
So I'll stop those tweets already.
Thank you.
And in fact, if I recall, in the Red Dwarf episode, Kennedy is himself the man on the grassy knoll. Huh. Yeah, that's something. That's really something.
Good Lord.
Anyway, so after discovering his parents and getting shooed away, which again he should have been done, he starts following himself, ending up at this carnival where he scares himself so much the younger version of himself falls off the carousel and breaks his arm.
His leg.
His leg, excuse me, which of course ruins that summer. And he says, he might have a slight limp.
About that whole thing, about how these are the moments that you're going to remember forever, so you need to treasure them. You're stalking a 10-year-old to say that? Hell, tell him something like, on December 7th, 1941, shit's gonna get bad.
Yeah, he's right. I would totally remember a scary dude scaring me off a carousel.
And it would probably really fuck you up.
But that's kind of it.
Yeah, couldn't he have just written a letter or something?
Maybe.
Like Back to the Future.
Well, the whole thing actually ends where when he confronted his parents earlier, he accidentally left his wallet there. His dad goes to the shutdown carol and says, I believe you are who you say you are. You still need to leave.
Right. And with that, we end up with this kind of weird situation where all of a sudden he ends up back in his town, but it's the modern day, and the milkshake now costs 35 cents or something crazy.
Goodness.
Right?
But do they think that we're all millionaires?
Yeah, the Rockefellers. It's weird. And then he has the limp, and that's it.
Just thinking about it, it would have made a lot more sense if he was like a Jay Gatsby character, right? Where he was obsessed with the past, and his obsession with trying to relive it destroyed him. But that's not what happens.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's not well established. I think the themes of the episode are really interesting, but it just never gets there. That's our second episode. So what we thought we would do here to kind of make it more interesting is pick between the two episodes on which one we think would be quote-unquote required viewing. So Matt, why don't you go first?
About which of these two shows in particular, or Twilight Zone episodes in general?
Which of
Matt, these two, the ones we just spent an hour talking about.
Okay. The pitch for the Angels is entertaining. The second one was kind of meh. I mean, the dad talking to the adult son at the end was well done, even though the dialogue in this thing was that sensible just because the actors pull it off. But overall, I don't think the episode is that good.
Daniel?
I'm going to agree with Matt that the conversation with the dad in the second one was really touching, but One for the Angels is much more of a requirement. It fits more into the Twilight Zone mold, for one. I don't know. The second one was just kind of weird because I couldn't get what they were going for. I don't know. I don't know what Vanity Fair and Time were thinking when they said this was one of the all-time best ones. But yeah, no, One for the Angels. It's the second episode of the series. Go that route.
Excellent. And I would agree with you guys. The first one feels so much like a Twilight Zone episodes in a way that the other ones don't. Like, effectively, there's two kinds of episodes. One's where the twist is at the beginning and one where the twist is at the end. It's appropriate that we kind of had like kind of the best version of that and the worst version of that, right? Like the twist comes at the beginning for both of them, which is that he is now gonna die and now he's back in his hometown. It's just funny that the second one just kind of peters out. I will say, though, the guy who played Martin did a pretty good job acting. It's very controlled, crazy acting. I think what makes or breaks the Twilight Zone is how good the main character is. Because, frankly, a lot of these will break down the same kind of story over and over again. And so it just depends on how much you believe the person. But with that, we're leaving the fifth dimension, the area between sight and sound, and we will return next week with our next two episodes. Daniel, should we give it to them so they can watch in advance, or what do you think?
Why don't we give it to them?
Okay, and again, this is everywhere. I think I watched it on CBS All Access because I got that for Picard, but I know it's on Netflix and Hulu right now as well. I believe it's also on Amazon Prime. Yeah, there you go. So the next two we're going to do is Time Enough at Last, which is, I think, the first thing I said when we got locked down, which is number 8 from season 1. Oh, and by the by, in case you're curious, One for the Angels was ranked 24 on this list, and Walking Distance was rated number 5. God knows what they were thinking. Time Enough at Last is rated number 7, and Third from the Sun, which is episode 14 for season 1. Apparently there were 900 episodes for season 1. On this list, we get up to 36 for season 1. Jesus Christ. But with that, we will still do every other Thursday a mainline episode. We will still be doing the once a month for the Patreon, although unfortunately, I believe at the moment, the syncable commentaries might be delayed for obvious reasons. But the plan is to try to do one of these per month or per week until this is lifted. And then we'll decide if we want to keep them up. But if you're listening to this now, please sign up for our Patreon, because if we hit $100 a month on Patreon, we'll start doing a monthly episode of Batman the Animated Series. And thanks for your support, guys. It really means a lot to us. Thanks, guys. Twilight Zone Zone is a production of Dude Letter Podcasting and Myopia Defend Your Childhood. It is hosted by Nick Hoffman, paneled by Daniel S. and Matt Quinn. It is edited by Nick and Daniel. The theme song is 6 Impromptus, Opus 5, Impromptu 5 by Jean Sibelius. The list is from Vanity Fair, the 26 episodes we talk about when we talk about The Twilight Zone by Donald Liebenson. The Twilight Zone is created, hosted, and mostly written by Rod Sterling. The Twilight Zone and all clips are owned by CBS Television and Cayuga Productions.